Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could join us. This webinar is a continuation of a series that we began in the late summer of 2020, and that's continued through the various public forums we've had with the action tracks in December and in February. We plan a few more leading up to the summit with a specific focus on civil society, and we're open to your ideas for future agendas. I'm just going to give you a few notes on logistics for the meeting because we have over 1,000 people registered. We welcome you to introduce yourselves in the chat. That's also a great way for everyone to get to know one another. But given the large number of attendees, we've set this up as a webinar rather than as a meeting. So if you have questions for the panelists or for anyone in the meeting, we would actually ask that you put them in the Q&A function. We'll monitor this area and do our best to answer these questions. If we can't answer them all, given the numbers of people in the meeting, we plan to follow up with a post-seminar note. So just ask questions and we'll work on answering as many as we possibly can live. And then when we can't, we'll get back to you later. You're also welcome to upvote questions. I believe that functionality is turned on. In addition, the meeting is being translated in French, Spanish, and Arabic. If you submit your question in French and Spanish, I think we have enough back-end support to be able to rapidly translate those, but for Arabic, we'll have to translate the text in advance. We'll do our best, and we are very happy you're here. I'm going to turn us over now to our moderator, which is Chris Hegedorn, the Secretary of the Committee on World Food Security. He'll take us through the agenda and introduce the rest of the panelists. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and great to be here today and to see so many people joining for this forum. My name is Chris Hegedorn, Secretary of the Rome-based Committee on World Food Security. It's a tremendous honor to be here and to assist you with the moderation of this forum. So as many of you know, CFS is the foremost international intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder platform driving global food security and nutrition work around SDG 2. In February, we just endorsed voluntary guidelines on food security, food systems and nutrition rather, which will serve as an important contribution to the coming summit. So it's now my tremendous pleasure to introduce our first speakers for this introductory portion of today's event. Dr. Agnes Calabada, it's wonderful to see you again. Dr. Calabada is the UN Food Systems Summit Special Envoy, former Minister of Agriculture of Rwanda, and a long list of distinguished accomplishments, which many of you already know. And we also have with us Mamadou Goita, who is the UN Food Systems Champions Group CSO Vice Chair for the coming summit. So let's hear from them today and get today's forum started. Over to you, Dr. Calabada.
Thank you, Chris. And I really want to use the moment to welcome everybody who is on today. It's good to see so many people, like you said, and really exciting to get the support that you are giving the summit. We're really excited about the work that you all are doing and the interest you're bringing to the summit. Just to put things in perspective, and I'm not assuming that everybody understands the summit and where it is at. To put things in perspective, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a brief of where the summit is coming from, and just briefly where it is at, and then my colleagues who you see and you will meet today will give you the details of different perspectives of the summit. So the summit was launched in 2019 by the Secretary General, really concerned that we are off track on a number of areas. And as you would know, hunger has been increasing and continues to increase, in fact, past COVID. In the number of, now we are learning so many new things about our food systems and beginning to understand a few things, our impact on climate. And again, from my part of the world, climate is the biggest challenge we are all dealing with. And then also the impact that this whole food system has also from a nutritional perspective when you look at obesity and all the other challenges. So many challenges to deal with. The good news is most of those challenges are part of what we have already defined for ourselves in the SDGs. So really, when the Secretary General launched the meeting, he was saying, can we come through on the SDGs in the next 10 years? Given that we've lost 5 years already, we are behind in a number of areas. Can we really find new ways of coming through and really come up with new ambition around action? But also then it's recognizing that coming through is going to have to recognize that our planet has challenges handling some of the demands we are putting on it. So the Food System Summit recognizes all those. So we designed the summit so that we can be able to reach massive numbers of people, and I hope you can help me even today as we talk to find ways of reaching new people with the summit and summit engagement. Just because it's the summit and the food system is about you and I. It's about how we eat, it's about what we eat, it's about the decisions we make around what we eat. That's what really defines the food system, because it defines what food is planted, it defines what food is transported, it defines what food is processed, and it defines how we use our environment. So I just really need you to understand that you and I have a huge role in the Food System Summit. And that's why it really, as the Secretary General said, he was calling for a People's Summit. And we've designed it as such so that we can reach people through dialogues. We have country level dialogues that are now going on. 78 countries have already committed to dialogues. David will be telling you about that. But also we have independent dialogues to give people from all walks of life an opportunity to dialogue. But we also have the opportunity to engage through the food systems community and the food systems heroes that are young people and all sorts of people out there that just want to know about the food system. And I hope that you also take the opportunity to check out our website and really engage in any way that you see profitable. The other part that the Secretary General called for that is extremely important is action. You know, action, and he called specifically for ambitious action. It's not that we don't act. It's also not that we don't know what to do. There are so many things in our midst that are already being done that can be taken to scale. And what he wanted was that we really become ambitious around action, especially given that we've lost some time. So action tracks are doing that work, and they'll be briefing you about that. They are looking at what type of action we need to be taking to be able to come through. We do have a scientific group that does look at the science of the summit and really wants to reassure people that we've looked at the science of the summit, recognizing fully well that the summit has no opportunity, is not negotiating anything. It's not a negotiated stand. And if we are going to be supporting member states on how they come through, we have to be talking about things they already know. We have opportunities for some negotiated ground coming from CFS, as you were saying, Chris. That negotiated ground voluntary guidelines that are being put here have really been reviewed by so many countries, and we can build on that from a food system and nutrition perspective. But really, the other negotiated ground is the SDGs that we are using. So I just wanted really to reassure you that the summit machinery is now out there and working, and the dialogues are happening, the action tracks are engaged, fully engaged. They've had many rounds of engagement, and I'll tell you about it. What we are doing, the reason that dialogues were extremely important, one point that I need you all to really know is the fact that we wanted to recognize that food systems are local, right? That it's about you as an individual, like I said before, but it's also farmers and farming communities and where they live. It's about their landscapes, and it's about how they interact with those landscapes, but it's also about consumers and the kind of culture that has been built around food and consumption. So these are all things that are extremely important that we'll be looking to engage around. I also want to thank you, Chris, and the chair of CFS for allowing me last week to have an opportunity to meet the CSM, which was a huge opportunity given the concerns that the CSM has expressed over the years, over the period of this summit. And I'm going to just mention 2 or 3, and I hope the others will come out as well as we go into the meeting. One is on human rights and the fact that the summit is not paying attention to human rights. And I just want to reassure you, the summit was designed specifically to address human rights issues. The summit was designed to come through on SDGs. which SDGs recognize the basis of SDGs is about human rights. But to make sure that we don't lose sight of that, even as we go into this, we are also working with Michael Farkley, the rapporteur on human rights. And he works with each of the people you're going to meet today, reminding them of the place and role of human rights as we go. So we definitely want to be kept on our toes and feet, but I need you to understand that that's not something we would take lightly. The second one was on corporate capture. The CSM definitely has expressed its views around the fact that a lot of corporates hasn't necessarily done justice when it comes to equity or delivered on things to do with equity. And they were very clear what their concerns were here, and they appreciate many of the concerns. And I was very clear that for us, from a summit perspective, exclusion is not how we would look at this engagement. Instead, being able to engage around issues that are very important, even issues that we don't, we don't want to talk about, even uncomfortable issues. And I've said this a lot of times. We can't build trust around how we engage unless we discuss issues that are difficult, all of us, and unless we are willing to sit around the table and have a conversation. So it's not that I don't understand the challenges of our times. I do, but I also understand the opportunities of engaging each one of us. I also want to reassure you that our summit instruments are led, for example, the people you're going to meet are all from civil society, mostly from civil society. We don't have a corporate leadership capturing the summit. And I just wanted to reassure you here that that's not the issue. The last one is on CSF and its role in the summit and the work that we do. I mean, CFS has just done a lot of work, has just put so many instruments there. And we've built a huge machinery. I keep saying we built a huge machinery using dialogues. We've taken, in those dialogues, you find governments there, you find private sector there, you find civil society there. This is the opportunity to actually roll out the CFS machine and build on some of these dialogues and ensure that these dialogues continue. Nowhere in our terms of reference does it say that we must replace CFS or we find new ways of doing business. We are going to do a summit, and the summit recognizes that there are instruments of the UN that will take the work of the summit forward. And I wanted to reassure you of that. And CFS is an instrument of the UN. I will stop there and give you a chance, give you the microphone back, Chris, but really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. And I really appreciate the support we are getting from you all. Thank you so much, and I look forward to this meeting. Thank you, Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you, Agnes. Great to see you, as I said. Great to have these conversations, both privately and publicly, with you, your team, the action track leaders. The CFS, at least the Secretariat, the chair, we see this summit as an opportunity to really drive progress, an exciting opportunity to really deliver on the SDGs. And the CFS, obviously, we have a long history from 1974 and since its reform in 2009. Lots of products to build on, guidelines, frameworks, principles, and we know the action track leads are deploying them. And of course, we have our own civil society mechanism, which is both robust, active, extremely engaged, and several of them are here today. So let me hand the mic to Mamadou Goita, as I said, UN Food Systems Summit Champions CSO Vice Chair. Mamadou, great to see you. The floor is yours, please. If you're connected, please take the mic.
Thank you very much for this. Can you hear me? Good. So thanks you very much for inviting the Champions Network to co-chair this very important event for the summit, because it's about CSOs that are a constituency that is really very important in such processes, not only in the process, but also in terms of designing the content of such summit. A lot has been said by Dr. Calabada. I thank a lot for coming on some of the key elements that she mentioned in terms of concern that have been raised by some groups of NGOs, but also some species. Because we all know that CSOs constitute a very important group in not only in the food system itself, but also ensuring the governance of the food system, because it's not a problem of content only, but it's also a problem of container, how to design the way that things are taken over, having access to communities in most of the cases, but as CSOs, having also competencies and some of the areas, some spaces for dialogue to build capacities of communities, but also some of the policymakers, but also contributing to educate people on the different perspectives on food system. I think that this is really a space where we'll be exchanging ideas, also contributing to this process, but also not forgetting that there are also different categories of CSOs in this process. Those who has been contributing since the very beginning, those who are just hesitating in terms of participation to it, and some of the group that are also not in the process because of some of the concern that Dr. Agnes Calabada just raised so far, that this is also an opportunity for everybody to ensure that this process is an open one, that this process will allow contradictory debate at the same time to build collectively a food system that will be really relevant for our future, because this is something that is very important. Institutions like CFS has been working a lot on this and then have been creating instrument pathways and different things that need to be included in this process, and also that to see how the biggest part of it, because you have to work on the upstream side, but also the downstream side, how the implementation of all this action that will be designed can be done, and what are the best places where we can do that. I deeply hope that CFS with the different mechanisms will contribute to that, because it has the experience, it has the instrument, it has also the dynamic in terms of creating contradictory debate that will be allowed to do this work in a democratic way at the end of the day. So dear colleagues and the CSOs, we hope that we'll be listening to what is going on so far. We'll be questioning ourselves in the chat box some of the concerns that we have, and that the role that we should play as CSOs will be highly consolidated in this process, but also beyond this process, the summit itself, because the summit is just one step on it. It should be in a way that we have access to spaces, we have access to information, we have spaces to express our concern, but at the same time, that we care about the after summit that is more important for all of us in terms of implementation. So I won't be very long to allow this discussion, that to say, welcome to everybody. And then this is a space where we have access to information, but we need to deepen our knowledge on the summit, but also contributing to change some of the concerns that have been raised by some people that have been answered to by Agnes Calabada, so that we have a summit that will be consensus. We cannot have all agreement. We don't have to homogenize things. We have to harmonize views on things so that it can be relevant for everybody. And CSOs have to play a big role on that stage. So on behalf of the Champions Network, I will really thank you for coming on board and have a fruitful debate so that we can come at the end of this exchange with deep knowledge on the summit and the process and the content, also what can be done. Thanks a lot for everybody.
Fantastic. Mamadou, thank you. And thank you, Agnes. Great opening remarks. I think just the fact that this forum is taking place, that there's so much emphasis on recognizing just how critical civil society is to the achievement of these sustainable food systems. And it's up to you. Your role is really keeping governments accountable for commitments they've made and protecting the rights and of course, the prosperity of their citizens. So we'll move to the next section, which is item 2, progress on the action tracks. And it's a pleasure to introduce Martin Frick, our friend from the, who is the Deputy Envoy of the UN Food System Summit. Martin, the mic is yours, please.
Chris, thank you very much. And again, a pleasure being here. And thank you for so many people joining us today. We have prepared a short PowerPoint presentation, and given the time limits, I think I'm going to speed through them. If this presentation is ready, if not, I can just briefly speak to the different points. What I want to emphasize is, what I want to emphasize is that this summit has from the outset communicated 4 goals we want to achieve. One is dramatically elevated public discourse at all levels. One is a new global narrative that inspiring voluntary actions for governments, but really for all stakeholders. And one is that a significant member state and multi-state action wave is being generated by this summit. We also want that this is not a moment in time, but really a beginning of trajectories towards the 2030 agenda. And it is basically looking into the future more than anything else. Now, if we can jump to slide 3, please. 3, that is the one before. Okay, we have clustered the work in the action tracks around 5 areas to come closer to the practical implementation of food systems as a driver for SDG fulfillment. But we have done that in the understanding that all of these 5 action tracks are interdependent and need to come together for areas of actions for collective work that is delivering as a food system. Just to recall the different action tracks, it's number 1, ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all. It's number 2, shift to sustainable consumption patterns. Number 3, boost nature positive production at scale. Number 4, advance equitable livelihoods. Number 5, build resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stress. And if I can have the next slide, please. So this is where we are currently with our Food System Summit dialogues, which are really bringing, if I may say, a bit of the CFS spirit to countries, because we're encouraging all countries of the world to host multi-stakeholder conversations, not only all of government, but really all of society. And if you look careful at the slide, you see the 78 still in track changes, because it goes so dynamically that this morning when we sent you the presentation, we were still at 75, so more countries coming online all the time. This is, I think, interesting, not only because it really triggers the conversations we need around systemic change, it's also most encouraging to see that developing countries are leading the way. As you can see, as of today, Asia Pacific has overtaken Africa as the front runner. That was still this morning. We have strong participation in Latin America and the Caribbean. We already did a Food System Summit dialogue in the United States. Eastern Europe is coming along. So this is really an interesting point, particularly for the CFS, also for follow-up work and really keeping the momentum in these conversations. Can I have the next slide, please? So we are trying our utmost to engage with all of the different constituencies. Of course, this is a UN summit and our member states are of utmost importance and really in the driver's seat. We have taken quite bold steps by, for example, having the action tracks driven by civil society and not driven by 2 co-leads that would be from 2 different countries like in other summits. But in every leadership group of every action tracks, we have a substantial number of countries with a very diverse regional distribution helping us in the action tracks. Other than the advisory committee in which countries and regional groups are represented, we have groups of friends in Rome, in New York, in Geneva, in Nairobi, that we are constantly consulting, we are listening to, and we are adapting our work according to those. And we do the same with indigenous peoples, producer groups, youth, private sector guiding group, and civil society. Now let me focus on the last 2 maybe. The private sector guiding group is something like a group of friends of business, but, and it's important to say that there are no individual companies there. There are no individual companies in the action tracks. We are listening to business associations and in particular to those who work with small and medium-sized enterprises. And that's a very important point to make. For civil society, we have a large participation of civil society, not only in our action tracks, but really in our champions network and in the country dialogues. We have a good take-up of civil society from our instrument of independent food system summit dialogues that complement what we hear from countries. And we have still a standing offer to the civil society mechanism to institutionally man 5 seats in the action tracks as CSM representing the networks. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is a slide that gives you about an overview about how we got to our ideas that we are currently processing. We have, as I said, civil society in approximately 30% of the AT membership. We have more than 400 submissions from civil society, including indigenous people, in the first wave of these game-changing propositions that we are currently processing. And it's important to say that our gates remain open and we will take more suggestions, and we are very grateful for those. And for the independent dialogues that I mentioned, we have 158 organized so far, mostly, and not many, but mostly by civil society organizations. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, and that is it. And I would hand over back to you, Chris, and I'm looking forward to the presentations of the action tracks and also to our discussion later. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. That's extremely clarifying and helpful. Our next speaker, we're going to move into the item 3, and we have as our next distinguished speaker, David Nabarro. And David, as many of you know, is not only a food security, food systems champion, he is also on the front lines dealing with the COVID-19 food system or health crisis. And we've already gotten some questions on just that. So David, if you are there, can take the mic. The floor is yours. Pleasure to see you again, as always.
Thanks very much. Great to be here. I see 474 participants. I'm honored. I'd like to offer more information about the dialogues processes, and I want to add in a way that hopefully helps you to interpret what Dr. Calabada and Martin Frick were saying just now. The way in which the dialogues have been introduced is as an approach to support systems change that fits into the context within which the systems are functioning. And that means that we have dialogues that can be taken forward by national authorities, by governments, as a way to explore food systems futures from a government perspective. We have food systems dialogues that can be taken forward independently by anybody, and we have food systems dialogues being taken forward in regional and global formats. The invitation to national governments to participate in dialogues and to use dialogues to help shape their own pathways for sustainable and equitable food systems was released by the Deputy Secretary General early in November. The initial uptake in response to that invitation was a little slow, and we weren't sure whether or not governments felt that this was a desirable thing to be doing. By the end of December, we had but a handful of countries committing to move forward. But during the first 3 months of this year, the situation has changed. We've contacted national governments through a variety of channels, but primarily through the UN resident coordinators and the organizations in UN system country teams. We've also contacted through the African Union Development Agency and as appropriate through other regional bodies. And we've briefed many hundreds of international actors working in food systems from the major groups, as well as from NGOs, development partners, and more. And so as we've gone into this year, we now have 81 countries who have said, yes, we want to be part of this process. We're going to appoint national dialogue conveners, and we're going to move forward. Now, for the rest of this briefing, I'm going to concentrate on who decides what in relation to these dialogues, because I believe that is what will be most relevant to you all. Who decides on the appointment of a national dialogues convener? Answer, it's the national government. The request went through the Deputy Secretary General to the permanent representatives, and the permanent representatives have forwarded the message through to the ministries of foreign affairs in different countries. And depending on the way in which the country is approaching the issue, the letter may have moved to other parts of government. Second, at what level are the decisions being made? What sort of people are being appointed as conveners? Well, this is really interesting. Slightly over half of the conveners are from agriculture. Some are senior technical officers in agriculture, but there's an increasing number of ministers of agriculture. But there is also nearly half the conveners are not from ministries of agriculture or reflect additional nominations over and above ministries of agriculture. And what's happening as well that you'll find interesting is that within many governments, the identity of the convener is shifting because of debates within the national government about where the point for food policy ideally sits. So in some countries, I don't want to mention them specifically, but you'll be able to find out, and I'll explain how in a minute. But in some countries, we have the Minister of Health and the Minister of Agriculture being nominated as joint conveners. This is a reflection of the work that many of you have been involved in to bring nutrition and health considerations into thinking about food systems. In some countries, the convener role has shifted from a line ministry to a coordinating ministry for the economy, or the vice president's office, the president's office, or even the coordinating body responsible for sustainable development goals. And so as we speak, there is a debate within countries about the position that the convener should fill. Who decides on the framing of the national dialogues, the invitations, the methodology, the language, whether they're virtual or face-to-face? Answer, the convener. And this is where we want to be really clear. This is a process where national government ownership is viewed as key. And so on all these issues, it is the convener that decides. What's the role of the UN system and others in this? Answer, catalytic and supportive. But the instructions from the heads of the agencies that are active at the country level have consistently been, please ensure that you are supporting national leadership. Does the UN system have the capacity to influence the framing of dialogues? To a degree, yes. This is quite important that you know this, that the UN system is encouraging the adoption of a SDG-wide approach to dialogues. The UN system is identifying and highlighting the underlying principles of the summit, and the UN system is encouraging attention to the particular key issues of leave no one behind and reach the hardest to reach first. And this will have an influence, no doubt, on the framing of the dialogues. Who decides the discussion topics for the dialogues? answer the convener together with whatever support team that they're putting in place. The advice is try to link your discussion topics to the SDGs and to the objectives of the summit as reflected in the action tracks. Who decides on the progression of dialogues in country and how they will be managed? That again is the convener. And we're finding that in each of the countries where we're in contact with conveners, they are clearer on what they're trying to do. And then perhaps finally, who takes the outcomes from the national dialogues and puts them together in syntheses, and what is done with these syntheses? The answer is we are responsible for harvesting the outcomes from the national dialogues that are prepared by the national conveners. These outcomes are public documents. They are posted on the Summit Dialogues website. We then are responsible for synthesizing, and we synthesize every 3 months. Our next synthesis is due on April the 16th. It will be a public document. So anybody who wants to will be able to look at the outcomes of the dialogues and the synthesis document that is prepared for the summit to check to see that you're happy with the way in which we've identified the emerging trends. Finally, what's done with the syntheses? Well, it's important that you should know that these are going to be laid before the action track chairs, the scientific group, the Champions Network, obviously the special envoy and others, so as to help them with positioning their work so that as the country dialogues evolve through to the pre-summit in July and the summit in September, there will be action track propositions reaching the country dialogues, and they will have been adapted to what the action track chairs find through the dialogue process. Final words from me. There are many moving parts to the dialogue program. We don't in advance know how countries are going to approach it. We don't in advance know what the dialogues are going to lead to. We offer the methodology, which we developed over the last 3 years, and we've offered support through our teams, particularly the UN country teams, but there's not a clear roadmap for exactly where the dialogues will lead. They are defined to be an open process. But that means that as we're seeing in all countries, there's plenty of scope for civil society engagement in the dialogues. And if there's ever a question about how civil society actors can get into the national dialogues, there are 3 routes. Number 1 is directly through working with the national conveners, who are announced on the Summit Dialogues website as soon as we've got permission from the national conveners to announce their name. So at the moment on the Summit Dialogues website, you don't find 81 names because we still are waiting for agreement from some conveners that their names can be identified. Secondly, if there's a UN country team in the country, it's a really good idea for a civil society group to access the UN country team and seek to understand about dialogues through them. Third route of access is just simply to undertake an independent dialogue as a civil society organization, because what's happening is that many national conveners are saying that they would like to embrace independent dialogues in the national dialogue effort, even if the independent dialogue is not pursuing an identical line to the national policy. And I'm very pleased, as you've just heard, that there are so many organizations now moving forward with independent dialogues. Thank you very much indeed for the chance to offer this rather tailored briefing for the community that is present at this meeting.
David, thank you very much. That's an incredibly rich piece of this summit plan. The dialogues, as we know, are global, they're national, they're local independent. And I can't emphasize enough how important the national dialogues are, and thrilled to hear Martin earlier comment that it is an opportunity for the national dialogues to emulate what we have with the CFS at the global scale, which is an inclusive platform for information science and data and knowledge-based policy convergence across many different ministries, many different communities. And if you are not in touch with your government about this, you should be. So now we're going to go back. The item 2, we need to hear from the 5 action track leads. And we have a wonderful group of people leading those 5 action tracks. We have Lawrence Haddad of the GAIN organization. We have Lasse Brun representing Action Track 2. We have Jao Campari of the World Wildlife Fund representing and leading Action Track 3. We have Christine Campeau representing Action Track 4, and Salamil Hook and Sandrine Dixon representing Action Track 5. So in order, we'll go 1 through 5, and we'll have briefings from each of those, starting with Dr. Haddad. So Lawrence, please, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Very happy to give you an update and take some questions on Action Track 1. Like all the other action tracks, we've been working on 2 routes really at the moment, trying to figure out how to organize the game changers that have emerged in Wave 1, and then identifying the gaps and beginning to develop ideas for Wave 2. So in terms of how to organize the Wave 1 game changers, we've been working on that. We're still not quite there, but we're getting close. There's a number of different ways one can organize them. You can organize them by outcomes, by enablers, by organic clusters, by essential shifts you want to see. And we're trying to figure out which combination of those is going to be the most impactful for action, because that's really what we're trying to achieve here. So please bear with us a little bit longer. We're close, but we're not quite there yet in terms of having a proposition to share with everybody. On Wave 2, Action Track 1 has been really busy. Our open ideas form, like all the other action tracks, is still open, and we're still receiving ideas. I believe they're going to be closed on April the 10th. They've been open for 6 months. I think, yeah, 6 months. They're going to close on April the 10th. We've gotten another 100 or so ideas for Wave 2. And unlike Wave 1, where we just essentially took what we thought were the strongest ideas, in Wave 2, we're trying very hard to fill gaps because there are gaps. From an organic process in Wave 1 generates lots of excitement and lots of great ideas, but inevitably there will be gaps. And so some of the gaps we've identified in Wave 2 that we are actively filling, first is around smallholders. There's quite a lot on hunger reduction, but not enough that focuses on smallholders. So we're looking at irrigation, solar-powered irrigation. We're looking at strengthening farmer organizations, what can be done there. We're looking at infrastructure, and we're looking at agricultural extension. And there are other things as well, but those are the ones I can most easily remember. Second gap we're looking to work hard on filling is young children. We know from the Standing Together for Nutrition projections around the impacts of COVID that by the end of 2022, we could have 9 million more wasted kids. And that means essentially wiping out 10 years of progress in 18 months. So that's something that was urgent before COVID and is even more urgent now. And we have a group working on an initiative around eliminating or wasting. We have a group still on the second group about young children. We have a group or 2 groups, I believe, working on early childhood diets. UNICEF is involved in that, but others are involved as well. The third gap we're looking at is youth in agriculture. I was just on a call yesterday or the day before yesterday with the coalition of youth organizations in Africa in agriculture that are working together on this. There are about 12 different organizations we've brought together, and the challenge that they have given themselves and they've given us to support in Action Track 1 is what is the investable proposition? Everybody talks about how important youth are in agriculture in Africa, but nobody invests in it. Well, why is that? Maybe it's partly because we're not giving them investable propositions, and maybe partly it's because everyone's full of hot air, and it's a good thing to say, but it's a hard thing to actually do. So we're really throwing down, the youth are really throwing down the gauntlet to potential investors in government and in the private sector. That's number 3. Number 4, we realized we have a big gap in vegetables. Vegetables are so key. It's a true no regrets crop, really. It's so key for farm revenue, for undernutrition reduction, for preventing diet-related chronic diseases, for promoting biodiversity. It has a potential to sort of revive some of the neglected, underutilized species that are rich in micronutrients, that tend to be farmed by women, that tend to rely on indigenous knowledge. This hits so many buttons, and of course it's good for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It tends to hit so many different things that we all care about. So we're working with a group on what can we do across the value chain to make vegetables more available and affordable, and actually to revalue them within society. They have been, it's not that they're always unaffordable, it's just that they are devalued somehow. So how can we revalue vegetables in a societal as well as an economic sense and a cultural sense? And the final area that we're working on is rights-based approaches to Action Track 1 work. We had already begun discussing this with Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and then the Right to Food group in FAO. Hillel Elver has joined our team about a month ago, former UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. And we're doing a bunch of work here. We're doing work on transparency. So stuff around knowing your rights and stuff around making violations of rights more visible and less comfortable. So there's some quantitative metric work and some storytelling work. And we're trying to get the right blend of qualitative and quantitative in there. There's work around accountability of governments, accountability of businesses, business standards, business regulation, business investment incentives, revamping investor standards for investing in businesses to bring them into line with food system outcomes. Mostly business standards that investors look to, if they're impact investors, are mostly around only environment, social, and governance. There isn't enough, we think, around tailored to food, specifically to food. So can we do anything better there? I think I better stop there, Chris, but those are some of the highlights. And of course, we're spending a lot of time at the moment listening to member states, because as David said, a lot of the country dialogues are happening. I was in the Ethiopia one a couple of weeks ago. I've been sitting in several of them, and we have 26 member states engaged in Action Track 1. I would say a third from the West and 2/3 from the rest of the world. And we are making a point of having one-to-one meetings with every single one of those groups to understand what are your priorities, what would you like to share with the rest of the summit, and how can we engage you in the development of Wave 1 and Wave 2 ideas as we move forward. So thank you, Chris.
Fantastic, Lawrence. That was a very good introduction. We'll make it through the 5 action tracks with Action Track 2 next. Lasse Brun, if you're with us, the mic is yours. Over to you for Action Track 2.
Thank you so much. And I'm really happy that Lawrence kind of set the scene for a lot of the methodology, because in Action Track 2, that is quite similar way we have been taking things forward. So I'm going to focus a little bit about what we have achieved so far and what we are looking at doing now. So coming out of the first wave of all the different amazing solutions that was sent our way from all parts of society and all parts of the world, we chose to put that into 4 main categories: one on food environment, one on food demand, one on food waste, and on cross-cutting solutions. So number 1, the food environment. Well, that's essentially like what is the environment in which we operate with food. So that's about city region food strategies and fiscal policy measures to improve food environments. It's about education. And it's also about getting the right people to address food. So for instance, mobilizing civil society and youth-led initiatives. Number 2, on food demand. Well, that's more about transforming the power and creating accountability so that governments and producers are producing the right food for the right people. It's about labeling. It's about making sure there is enough nutrition in the food to meet the demands for the consumers. And it's about something like breastfeeding, for instance. How is breastfeeding relating to food demand, and why should people be breastfeeding for longer than is the case now? So a lot of complex issues there. Number 3 is around food waste. And this is a big one. Most of you will know that at a global level, at least 1/3 of all food is wasted either post-harvest or post-consumer and anywhere in between, which is absolutely horrible when you think about that. So making that a key issue is one of the best ways we think we can also mitigate some of the problems of feeding a growing population, particularly on an increasingly climate change constrained production system. So the food waste is category is around finding ways to deal with that the most practical and most rapid way. So one of this is to look at food as never being waste. It cannot be categorized as waste. We need to attribute it the value it has. It is about finding ways to engage in countries. There's one solution, for instance, that looks at finding 150 countries that can launch national public-private partnerships to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. And then to the 4th category, which is around cross-cutting themes. We came up with 3 cross-cutting themes that kind of underlines everything that we do when you talk about Action Track 3. One of them is to ensure that we are setting it forward proper dietary guidelines. And it's not just about creating new dietary guidelines. There are lots of dietary guidelines out there. It's about ensuring that they are run through the public in the proper way, that they're suitable, and it's the right stakeholders that are developing them. And they're actually de facto guiding the way people eat in their respective countries. It's also about finding ways to find fiscal and appropriate national plans to empower women to work more strongly in the agriculture sector. As you know, there is a discrepancy between how many women are working in the agriculture sector, particularly in low-income countries, and how much power they actually have. This is absolutely horrible, and this is something that should be dealt with as part of this summit as well. So we are putting extra emphasis on that as a key underlying theme. The 3rd cross-cutting theme is around just transition within the livestock sector. And that is looking at how we need to move away from an excessive use of animal agriculture in the global north to find a more equitable way of distributing those resources, both from a land use perspective, but also from a perspective of meeting nutrition deficiency in low-income countries. And the focus on that is around how we can use that to mitigate climate change, improve health, particularly in the global north, and meet nutrition deficiency in the global south, and also how that can become a net job creator and actually boost the GDPs. So those were kind of in a nutshell, very briefly around the first wave. Looking at some of the discussions we're going to be having now, like Lauren said, we have also identified different gaps in Action Track 2 that we now will be taking forward. Some of them is looking at particularly indigenous knowledge. We realized that we have not been good enough at taking that into account when looking at the different solutions. So that's something we'll be putting much more focus on. And also looking at subsidies. We want to subsidies to support healthy food, but also to move officially away from unhealthy and factory farm food. So it's not just a divestment, sorry, not just an investment, but also a divestment from the more unhealthy food production systems. And there are issues around improving government policy legislation to drive the work forward, animal welfare, and also looking into what is the role of plant-based and cellular agriculture, if any. How does it play a role going forward with the food system. And overall, we're also going to be looking very much at how we can take all of the outcome of Action Track 2 and indeed of all the action tracks and make it as implementable as possible moving forward, particularly looking to the major events that falls just after the summit, i.e. COP26 in Glasgow. So we look forward to taking that forward, and feel free to reach out at any time. I put my email in the chat box, and always happy to take conversations and questions from either of you. Thank you.
Fantastic, Lasse. 30 more seconds just to tell us what the 50 by 40 organization is. Lasse.
50 by 40 is a collective impact organization. It's based on the premise that there is not good enough collaboration between all the different actors in the third sector. So we're trying to bring very different organization across methodology, whether it's litigation, policy, demand and changing behavior, or whether it is from organizations working on climate change, animal welfare, health, faith, whether it's national, subnational integration, trying to bring all those together and find how can we all of us work together to create a better food system. So we have very different theories of change, but we all have the same goal moving forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks. And it's great to see you and actually meet you today. We haven't had a chance to meet. Action Track 3, we have the pleasure of having João Campari with us from the World Wildlife Fund. João, can you hear us? If so, then the floor is yours. Wow. And just for we have 3 more action tracks to get through. So just we'll try to keep it under 5 minutes each and save time for Q&A. Over to you, João.
Thanks, Chris. Delighted to be here. And I will be very, very quick to leave time for questions and answers here. In fact, just on the matter to be quick, I'd like, sometimes we focus a lot, rightfully so, on the merit and the content of the Food System Summit and the action tracks, but we tend to forget that time is this silent broker that is between us, where we are now, and 2030, which is when we need to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. And in Action Track 3, we depart from the principle that we are 9 harvests away from delivering the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goal. And our the current food system or its impacts on nature and climate is limiting our ability to deliver the SDGs. So we need to move. We cannot manage time, but we can manage the pace at which we deliver our actions. And this is what action tracks are all about. And when we talk about nature positive production, we also need to bear in mind that the solution is not simple, right? I mean, we can't phase out of food like we're trying to do with fossil fuels to fix things. We need to change the system. And the other thing that we have in mind in Action Track 3 is that we cannot vilify the food system. Rather, we need to take ownership and reconsider the choices that we collectively make about how to produce and consume food, and we need to take action to redesign the system by redesigning the enabling conditions that shapes our choices and the way forward. So I just like to make that, to call for the urgency at which we need to operate here. Now, nature positive food systems, we recognize that biodiversity underpins the delivery of ecosystem services on which humanity depends, and that these are critical for the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Convention of Biological Diversity, the Paris Agreement, and we also have in mind that nature positive also means people positive. And that's why we have in our goal statement, it's a purpose-driven goal in which we take boosting nature positive production systems at scale need to globally meet the fundamental human rights to healthy and nutritious food while operating within planetary boundaries. We have this vision that we need to deliver resilient landscapes, riverscapes, and seascapes, that includes human, animal, and environmental health. And the way that we understand the system is by articulating 3 core areas. We need to protect natural ecosystems against further conversion for food and feed production. We need to manage sustainably existing food production systems to the benefit of both nature and people. And the third aspirational goal is to restore and rehabilitate degraded ecosystems and soil function for sustainable food production and maximization of ecosystem services. In Action Track 3, we work also to refocus nature positive production systems towards rights-based approaches to deliver the SDGs. We also believe that we need more solidarity within the system to make this happen. We also work to redesign policy and the enabling conditions for systemic transformation that will lead to nature positive outcomes. Third, we work to repurpose financial flows, national, international, to deliver public goods, which includes the human right to a healthy environment. And fourth, we need to be pragmatic and resolve systemic challenges by delivering nature positive solutions. And these are what we are calling game changers or main propositions. In our action track, we are calling out several, we received more than 200 game changers. Right now, there are some that appear in various action tracks, like the role of agroecology, regenerative agriculture, agrobiodiversity. Today we rely on 12 plants and 5 animals for 75% of the caloric intake for humans. Why can't we expand that? Double that number, triple that number, that it would reduce greatly the impact on ecosystems and would positively, I assume, impact human health. So agrobiodiversity is a key game changer. We also have another game changer that is looking into redirecting agri-food support, which includes subsidies, but it's not restricted to subsidies. We need to take an expanded look at how agri-food support systems are in place and what value they are delivering or not, and redirect them. Now, there are some gaps in our action track that we are working to resolve. For example, in wave 1, we didn't have any gender specific propositions. Now we are working with our gender lead to develop that. We have a really interesting idea on increasing the access for women in land tenure, for example. There is also a gap on finance mechanisms. We need to take a deeper look at that. We need to highlight the role of farmers and fishers and make them explicit in this, in our action track. They are the first stewards of land and water, so we need to bring them forward and to the center stage in this. The role of soils, we are looking how to bring that forward more in a more pronounced way, and also the role of blue food. There are several gaps that we need to address. We are moving forward, but we really look forward in this, as we are going to this wave 2, to hear from the global community about these specific areas. So let me stop here, Chris, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. And it's good you mentioned the blue food, because Action Track 4 is up next. Christine Campo will be speaking. But amongst the vice chairs, we have Shakantula Thilsted with World Fish. And I think it's an important point that you made about blue food. We're not talking only about corn and rice and land-based food production. Food farming means fish, it means aquaculture, it means sustainable systems in the oceans and inland waterways. So let me ask Christine Campo, please, for Action Track 4. The mic is yours. Over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. I've been having problems with my mic lately. I'm Christine Campo. I'm the Sherpa to Michelle Nunn as chair of Action Track 4. We can't do this alone. CARE is very much proud to be that backbone to move this work forward. So as Chris said, we have a vice chair, Shakantula Thilsted from World Fish. We have a youth vice chair, Maitai Yumon from the UN Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. And we have lots of support from our UN anchor, IFAD, under the leadership of Marie Haga. On today's call, we have several from our leadership group that support the work and guide the work that we do. And in case you want to know who those people are, I've popped some links into the chat. Feel free to look at who shapes the work of Action Track 4 on a daily basis. What are we looking at in Action Track 4? What type of solutions what do they need to satisfy? So first, we need to build agency and voice for the most underrepresented and vulnerable across the food system. Second, we need to change the power relationships in food systems, both in the formal and non-formal spheres. And finally, we need to seek structural transformation and those embedded social norms and practices that systematically privilege some groups over others. Since the focus of Action Track 4 is on livelihoods, we need to be clear about whose livelihoods we're talking about. It's unethical that the most underpaid and exploited people around the world are those who grow our food, partially because of the seasonality of the work, but there are so many, many reasons. I take this personally. I grew up as a female farmer on a farm in Southern Ontario, and the farmland that I was raised on is no longer in the hands of my family. In fact, the entire landscape has changed. Despite being very fertile land, the ground is now covered in greenhouses worked by migrant workers who have little to no protection or rights. We don't have enough time for me to go through all the people that we are looking to take care of, or to support. So I'm popping some more stuff into the chat. The numbers are in flux. I'm sure I don't have the right. I know that's a debate right now, getting those numbers right. But just to give you a sense of who it is that we're focused on in Action Track 4. And once we know the who are we actually talking about in the work that we're doing, we opened up a series of consultations like the other action tracks to find out how. And we really appreciate that these consultations, such as the one that we're having today, are only accessible if you have access to internet. They're time consuming and take time away from our loved ones and our work. And they further compound the inherent biases. Who in the household controls the mobile phone? So I'm really pleased that a lot of the leadership group members have reached out, engaging their own networks to host subnational and national dialogues and support the work that David's doing to really make sure we're hearing from those underrepresented voices that are very, even more difficult to hear from now that COVID has kept us out of physical distance from one another. So where are we at in the process? Wave 1 is over. We spent so much time doing consultations with all of you. A lot of what Action Track 4 came up with was solutions that we heard from you and that we started drafting up ourselves because we thought they were such great ideas as leadership team. And there's so much crossover now that we've come together as the Action Track leads. As you've heard from the Action Tracks leads that spoke before me, human rights, agency and empowerment, land and water tenure, financial support to SMEs, gender transformative approaches. That is cross-cut, one of the most, we even have a lever on it, and very, very active lever at that, because these are such fundamental elements that need to be considered. And it was interesting when we started pulling our solutions together. For example, several of us have mentioned agroecology. So Action Track 3, since they're tasked with looking at food systems from an agriculture production model, they got submissions from agroecology because it's good for the environment. Action Track 4, we look at the social economic impacts, land ownership, food sovereignty, and that's why we were getting agroecology submissions through our work stream. And same with number 5, on risk. How do we build that community strengthening aspect to make sure that when risks do happen, that support system is there? And the same for Action Track 1 and 2. All of us were coming together saying, hey, we have a lot of overlap in the work that we're doing. And those who understand agroecology understand and appreciate those multi-benefits that it brings. So I'm going to end here. I wanted to at least make sure everybody has a sense of wave 1. So I'm going to pop those into the chat as well. Take a look at what wave 1 looks like. We have, as my lead said before me, lots of gaps. We were allowed to put 20 forward, and we know even fisheries with our vice chair isn't included in our first wave, and that's why we've come together. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much, Christine. Action Track 4 is really digging deep into these issues around rights and dignity and full participation by gender, by youth. So great description there. Action Track 5, we have Salim Ulhok, but also Sandrine Dixon-DeCleve, who I'm going to hand the mic to, and Salim will come in after. So for Action Track 5, Sandrine, the mic is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. And it's really a pleasure to be here and to have this conversation. I hope we'll get some good exchange with the civil society folk that are actually on the line. I have the pleasure of presenting Action Track 5, and let's say last but not least, in any case, Action Track 5, in the same way that the other action tracks, have been working very closely with a variety of different actors, went out and did a survey, trying to get as much responses as possible in terms of new game-changing solutions. And what we really wanted to achieve in this process was, first of all, to ensure that everyone understands the importance of resilience and taking into consideration today's convergence of tipping points, clearly between biodiversity loss, climate, and also the pandemic, how do we look at the food system within that context, but also look at the complexity of different types of fragile zones, conflict zones, and other types of geographies in order to properly understand where and how we can build resilience. Because what we really want to do in Action Track 5 and through our resilience work is to come up with a holistic approach. This is the cross-cutting track. It is the track that looks at systems. So when we look at systems, we had to come into a very clear understanding of what are the economic impacts when we look at resilience, what are the environmental impacts when we look at resilience, what are the social impacts when we look at resilience, and clearly what are also the peace or conflict impacts when we look at resilience, and then bring all of that into a systemic approach. Our framework means that actually we started by looking at conflict, epidemics, economic shocks, and weather extremes as the clear kind of resilience triggers that we needed to think of. Then we have clear enablers, partnerships, innovation, synergies, and empowerment of the most vulnerable. And we set up a series of working groups. And I think it's really important, based on how Martin started off and also Agnes, to remind everyone that actually we have in our team composition a perfect gender parity. We have stakeholders from across civil society. In fact, civil society and academics are 90% of our stakeholder base in our team. And we have a variety of geographies that are represented. And this for us, from a resilience perspective, was fundamental. We then have focused through all of our game-changing solutions on key transformational principles to ensure we build resilience across the food systems. So this is this integrative cross-cutting approach where we've taken into consideration diversity and redundancy, the importance of livelihoods within the food system, all of the sustainability challenges, all the way from environmental to social and economic sustainability, prosperity for all, and equity. Ensuring that we actually have a peaceful and social cohesion, that we look at those conflict zones very carefully in terms of proper solutions, a human rights-based approach. And this goes beyond just the human rights of being assured, but also the right to food, access to food, food as a global right. And then the context-specific aspects of small island developing states, fragile zones, including oceans, as well as how we put in place proper adaptation. And of course, the most important point with regard to resilience has been around the anticipatory nature of resilience and taking into consideration the pandemic. And we've heard back from David and many of the member states that are involved in our approach, the importance of looking at the impacts of COVID in terms of the value chain, but also the potential growing impacts of having multitude of crises at the same time. And what will that actually do? So in looking at all of this framework, we've been able to put in place some very serious game-changing solutions. But to be frank, as well as has been expressed by some of the other colleagues, as much as we've received some fabulous game-changing solutions and we still have the possibility to get some of those solutions from you, we do feel that there have been some gaps in terms of a better understanding of what is a real cross-cutting approach. What are the transformational pathways that we need across the system where we can optimize between the nutrition element, but also the access element, the environmental elements, but also the social elements, so that we can ensure true resilience across the entire system. Also, how do we ensure that we get the same narrative across on resilience within COP26, the CBD COP, negotiations that we're seeing at the G7 and the G20, what many of the civil society groups have been asking for from member states, that they are coherent and accountable in terms of their interrelationships within the global economy, but also the way in which we look at these crises and their impacts. So what I can say is that we have gathered 140 different game-changing solutions. Of those, we have brought them down to about 25. And we are now in the process of working with the other action tracks to ensure that we bring into consideration those key game-changing solutions, some of which actually are in different action tracks, but that we do pinpoint the most important ones from the perspective of resilience for the resilience track. Can I also add that what we've noticed from the resilience track is the absolute importance of civil society, communities, and youth. We've had absolutely interesting stories and feedback from, in particular, youth groups that have been on the front lines, both in conflict zones, but also in those COVID areas where they've been able to act as real ambassadors and champions of change within their communities. Bringing all these learnings, I think, has to also be done now in terms of understanding how we build greater resilience within the system. So I will leave it at that. And I look forward to all of your questions and also greater participation from some of you in our action track. Thank you.
Sandrine, thank you so much. Salimul, did you want to come in now and
yes.
Supplement that? Great. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris. I won't take very long. I just want to supplement Sandrine's excellent presentation of the Action Track 5 by adding a little personal note, if you like. My work based in Dhaka, Bangladesh, has been on primarily looking at vulnerable populations and communities to climate change, and now in the Food System Summit, also for food systems as well. And what is important to me is enhancing the voices of, the emphasis of, the prioritization of the most vulnerable communities, both in the context of the food systems as well as in the context of climate change, and linking the two going forward. And Action Track 5 on resilience does that. And the second point I'd like to also emphasize that Sandrine has mentioned is an emphasis on youth as a solution going forward. We see a great deal of potential there in youth. We have an excellent vice chair for youth, Mike Kunga from Malawi, and we will be supporting all the other youth vice chairs in the other action tracks and emphasize the role, innovative role of youth as a solution to food systems across the world, particularly in the most vulnerable and fragile states. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Salimul. Thank all of you. Actually, those were great summations. I know there's so much more going on, so much more to be said, but this is an introduction and there's plenty of time for questions. And so we'll move to that question and answer section next. Martin Frick, he will address questions about post-summit, and we have about a half hour, 35 minutes. And let me say up front, we already have 73 questions, and those are just the ones in Q&A. Now, I've asked and confirmed that the Secretariat and the organizers will seek to answer all of the questions, at least to the best of their ability after the event. If we don't get to all of them, as I know we won't, we'll have 10 of those questions. I'm going to ask 3 in a row, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to respond. I'm going to read out the questions for interpretation, and then I will ask either one or multiple panelists to respond. So let me start, and excuse me if I do not pronounce names correctly, I'm trying. Eva Gaukait asked about the outcomes of the summit, and is there a plan for implementation of those outcomes? And I'm paraphrasing her question. Pat McMahon asked about COVID-19. He notes that there's no focal point for the summit on COVID and wonders if there's a plan to operationalize machinery with the summit to address COVID-19 with all of its impacts on food security. And the third question from Patricia Ekene Adebisi, I believe from Nigeria. She asked about food costs and how developing countries, as a result of this summit, can help escape the poverty trap that is seeing rising food prices and other challenges. So let me start with those 3. And I'll maybe ask for a volunteer if let's see, the outcomes, maybe Martin Frick, you take that first one, and then we'll see if others want to respond. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Chris. The outcomes, I think you can only understand them with the basic assumption that our food system and our food systems are broken. So we need change, and we need the change to come bottom up and top down at the same time. So with this in mind, one area of change is already happening right under our eyes. 78 countries convening to Food System Summit dialogues do bring their stakeholders together and make food systems an all of government and an all of society issue. This is in itself, I believe, a game changer. And I'm confident that we will be seeing at the summit moment quite a few heads of state and government announcing in one way or another how they are working on food systems transformation. It might be a new setup, something like the CFS in country style, so to say. It might be a food systems policy. It might be a special role of a national convener to be perpetuated in a prime minister office. That's on a national level. Then, and I think the action track chairs have made that really, really clear. The magic is in the systems. The elements of them are known, but if we are able to bring back coalitions, to bring coalitions around systemic shifts that need to happen, I think we are up to something. These areas for collective actions, as we are currently calling them, will be underpinned by people, by organizations, by academia, by all walks of global society, and they will develop a life on their own. We are also working with our champions network, and they will not drop being a champion for food systems at the moment of the summit outcome. And we hope, not least, that the Secretary General's statement of action at the end of the summit will really provide this global inspiring narrative that helps orient many political decisions and discussions towards a more systemic approach. And I hope that answers the question. And back to you, Chris.
Super. Thank you, Martin. Anybody else want to take a stab at Sandrine? I see your hand up. Do you want to give that a...
Chris, I'm happy to take a try at the food cost, because I think this is something that, again, is a perfect example of a cross-cutting issue that has to be looked at both in terms of the costing, the externalities of the impact that we have in growing food and waste on actual food cost, but then also looking at the way in which we can help the most vulnerable and those that have difficulty of having access to food, getting access to food. So for us, there is a series within the costing element of understanding the importance of the rights to food, but also ensuring that we cost food properly when we take into consideration the externalities, both in terms of the social costs and the environmental costs. And that means that there needs to be a proper conversation amongst us, but also with academics, experts, economists, to really start to unpack the tensions here, because this is a fundamental point in getting things right and in bringing people on the journey as we move through the food system as being core and essential. Also, when we've seen how important this has been through the COVID pandemic.
Thanks, Sandrine. Let me ask, the other question from Pat was about COVID-19, and I was wondering maybe David Nabarro, if he is on, given his role with WHO, and then maybe Martin Frick or others might have some additional comments. David, is that one you can take? Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here, but I don't think I can actually answer the specific point, because although I'm a WHO envoy on COVID, I think that I have to be a little careful not to speak on behalf of WHO. Back to you.
Okay, understand. Certainly don't want to put you in that position. Martin, how about you take a stab at that, and then Christine's hand is up as well.
Thank you. I mean, COVID is with us, and it's all the time there. And it is maybe the most pressing example of a systems approach being needed. Because if you look at COVID, there's the point of vulnerability. Our food systems have suffered. The number of hungry and malnourished people is going up. But that's only one part of the truth. Christine spoke to the unacceptable working conditions of people in food systems. And it's not surprising that fruit pickers or meat processor are amongst those groups who are most affected by COVID. So in our deliberations, and that's the most complicated bit on how to frame these things, how really cluster areas so that they make sense for systemic change. One Health is a fundamental element of what we are discussing, because we know about the interdependency. We know that plant health, soil health, animal health, human health, and planetary health are intrinsically connected. And we also know that evidence is there that COVID is ultimately a zoonotic disease. We have suffered from other zoonotic diseases, and we know that the conditions we have in our food systems are actually conducive to more zoonotic diseases. So we have to look at it from an impact side. We are looking at it also as a potential threat for the next health crisis. And we certainly look into also One Health from an aspect of human health, soil health, the interdependence of that. So it comes in many different flavors. And if there is not COVID out there, it's certainly COVID in there in the way we are looking at it from many different aspects.
Fantastic. Thanks, Martin. And I'll point out, just make a plug, on the CFS website, you'll find quite a number of documents from the meetings that the CFS convened last year around COVID and food security and nutrition. And that includes a very comprehensive paper by the CFS high-level panel of experts on the responses, policy recommendations included on the COVID crisis. So I'll put that in the chat. In the meantime, Christine, please, over to you.
Great timing. I was just about to plug your work. COVID has exposed so many of the inequalities in our food systems, and that is why we are coming together in the CFS and the UN Food System Summit and all these global events, World Health Assembly, looking at what do we do to make sure we build back better. And because there will be more pandemics, there will be more crisis. Ask Action Track 4, they're the experts on this one. For Action Track 5, Action Track 4, a lot of our solutions center around social protection, access to service, local supply chain protection, gender transformative actions that we are dealing with directly as a cause of COVID impact. The gender-based violence, the increase in that has been dramatic, and that is something that we all hold very dear to our heart. And all those solutions need to be firmly grounded in a human rights framework, so that is the approach we're taking to everything that we're putting forward. Over.
Okay, fantastic. I understand I missed one of our lever leaders, on particularly the one on gender, which is something, Christine, you mentioned earlier. Is Susan Carrier still with us? If she is, I'd like to have her respond on the point and the importance of gender and what it means to be one of the 4 levers of change. Susan, are you still with us? If not, I apologize, we missed the opportunity, but it is important to understand that in addition to the 5 action tracks, in addition to the science group, you also have 4 groups working on gender, on rights, on innovation and finance. And these, of course, go to the heart. They're cross-fertilized across the 5 action tracks and allow, particularly on this rights question, being at the heart of so much of what this community is about. It's quite an important one. So let me continue with some questions since Susan is not with us, but a question from Saskia Kolu, who asked about nutrition education and being quite weak. They ask, are there any plans or campaigns that would make food system transformation more visible in schools and education curricula? Great question. That's one of my central themes of importance is education. Emilio Martinez Aguirre in Mexico, he asks, how will the Food System Summit strategy energize local platforms? And I know David Nabarro has spoken to that already, but again, how do we strengthen those the local energy? And then one last question in this round, Jack Ryan asks about aquaculture and its critical importance to enhancing diets and human health, and where is that being addressed in the action tracks and summit plans. So with those three, do I have a volunteer perhaps around, let me ask Lawrence, given how close he is and how much work he does with GAIN on nutrition and education. Lawrence?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for a great question. There is a very large piece of work that's spanning several of the action tracks around learning about nutrition in school. Sometimes it's wrapped up in school feeding programs. Sometimes it's wrapped up in curriculum development. Sometimes it's wrapped up in adolescent movements around nutrition and healthy diets. So there's a great deal. There's also work going on agriculture, learning about agriculture in school as well. So there's a lot.
Okay, thanks, Lawrence. What else? And just as a plug, UNESCO is doing quite a bit around sustainable, both the science and the sustainability aspects. And I know they're interested in working with us to promote nutrition education as well as sports and health. So again, lots of partners, lots of people working in this space. How about the question about the energizing local platforms from Mexico? Emilio, David, or perhaps someone else want to address that sort of energizing locally on those platforms?
David, saw Lashley put his hands up. I'm ready. I've got 5 questions that I'd quite like to answer quickly in a cluster. Either I do it on the Q&A or I do it verbally when you're ready.
Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Thank you very much indeed. Maria Diaz said, how are member states and game-changing solutions connected? Answer, as the member state dialogues progress, they receive propositions from the action tracks and they will look at them along with national priorities that emerge. Richard Harris talks about independent dialogues in Italy. Nothing should stop you moving ahead and registering as an independent dialogue convener and organizing an independent dialogue if that's what you want. Lebohang Litha said, why are some countries moving slower than others with appointing national dialogue conveners? Answer, because there's quite a lot of debate within countries, often at cabinet level, about where responsibility for looking at the future pathway of food systems should lie, in one-line ministry or in an integrating ministry. Will the process be described in the synthesis report of mid-April? Answer, yes. Then a question on the deadlines for dialogues from Amanda Giancola. Just to say, if you want to be having your dialogue outcome incorporated in the synthesis for the pre-summit, feedback on your dialogue needs to be published on the Summit Dialogues website by mid-June. If you want your outcomes to be incorporated in the synthesis that will be produced just before the summit, could you please post your feedback by mid-August? The syntheses will be public and posted both on the Food Systems Summit website and on the subsidiary website for the dialogues. And there will be one synthesis of the member state dialogues, another synthesis of the independent dialogues. Some of you want to know how to find out details of the national dialogue conveners. DK Sadana asked about South Asia, and there was also a request to know about the Pakistan convener. We put the names of the conveners on the www.summitdialogues.org website as soon as the convener agrees that their name can be put on there. But there is a delay, and that's because we don't always get immediate agreement, but as soon as we get it, we put the name up. National dialogues are being prepared now. That means it's very timely to come in with your independent dialogues on the issues that matter to you now, because national dialogue conveners are on the lookout for what independent dialogues are taking place within their jurisdictions. There was a comment that I saw from some rapporteurs saying, what if the table is already set, the seating plan is non-negotiable, and the menu is highly limited? I can understand that concern, but I do believe that the national dialogues and some of the subnational dialogues that are occurring do not have non-negotiable seating plans. There are limits, of course. One never is completely able to decide who comes to the table. But I think there are opportunities at the moment for groups who perhaps do not normally participate in discussions about food to engage in the national dialogue. Certainly, from our perspective, that's desirable. And we really do hope that groups that are actively advocating right to food are participating in the national dialogue so that that point of view is strongly captured there. Thank you, Pat McMahon, for your point. That's it from so far. I'll go on looking at the questions. Back to you, Chris.
Hang on, David. We won't let you off the hook so quickly. One question I have is the CFS at the global scale, global model, does that offer a way forward for governments to structure these national dialogues? And how are these internationally negotiated tools like the voluntary guidelines for the right to food, voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition, how will they be used in these dialogues?
Absolutely. I have to say, Chris, to everybody, the CFS as a really truly multi-stakeholder mechanism that is able to provide voluntary guidance for governance principles is really important. And every time we talk with national governments, they do mention to us that they look at the CFS as a really valuable model. Here's what most of the national government people tell us. One is we do want to have multiple stakeholders involved in shaping the pathways to our national food systems. We do want to build on existing multi-stakeholder arrangements in country. We do want to have farmers and other food producers participating. We do want civil society participating, consumers' representatives, children, young people, scientists, and all those who are involved in every single part of the food system. That wish for breadth is there. I think what we sometimes find is that government ministers and others responsible for convening are never quite sure what is the easiest way to make sure that they do get this breadth of involvement. And we strongly encourage them to look at the CFS. We also offer them possible lists of stakeholders that they can consider inviting, and also ways of ensuring diversity and inclusion. But the CFS model is there, is appreciated, is used. And I want to stress the voluntary guidelines, hugely valued, and these short versions of the voluntary guidelines that you've talked about and put up and made accessible are very, very actively explored. I think that this is an important thing for me to state and restate. What CFS has done is noted, is being used, and I encourage everybody to go on presenting the CFS materials into the national dialogues process, either centrally or subnationally, or even when dialogues are going into regional formats like Pacific Islands or Caribbean islands. Again, CFS products, hugely relevant. I want to say FAO, IFAD, WFP are taking them in where they possibly can.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. That's great to hear. The inclusivity piece is the most important part of that model, even if it means listening to some inconvenient truths and some opinions you might not want to hear, or even if it's frustration. But great to hear, and we really appreciate that support. Zhao, you had your hand up and wanted to come back to that one of those questions. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. I don't want to let the aquaculture question to slip. So I'm coming back to that. It's super important. So the home for aquaculture on the production side would be Action Track 3. And we are collaborating very closely now, including working with Action Track 4, Shakuntala, and Action Track 5, because this is super important for livelihoods and resilience as well. And not to stop there, this is super, super important for Action Track 1 on nutrition, because I mentioned before, among the 12 plants and 5 animals that correspond to 75% of human caloric intake, the 5 animals are pig, chicken, cattle, sheep, and goat. Fish is not there. So, you know, this is, it's stunning. So we do need to understand how aquaculture can play a role in there. And we are very aware of the environmental impacts of aquaculture. So it needs to be done in the right way. So I don't remember who asked that question, but I would really, really appreciate more engagement as we put forward in the next week or so, the areas for collective action or the propositions for us to really make our the group that is discussing aquatic foods stronger. So please do come forward, watch the space, because this is super important. Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. A few more questions. We have, it's about 3:15. We do have 15 more minutes. So let's try to get in as many questions as possible. There's some very practical questions. I know the Secretariat team and panelists are working to answer those. And if not today, then we'll follow up in writing. But Brian in DC asked about the pre-summit. He wanted to know if NGOs will be participating. Thought that was a good practical question. You have a question about what was written, I think, last night by Michael Fakhri, who was mentioned earlier, in terms of human rights being squarely rooted in the outcomes of the summit. And I know that's been addressed somewhat if anybody wants to take that any further. And then there's a long question. Let me paraphrase from Hans Herren, who I understand was co-chair of the IAA STD process back in 2005, 2007. You recall that was before the last big major food summit in 2009 and the reform of CFS. But I think paraphrasing is basically kind of frustration expressed as, we've known this for, we've known all this for the last decade, 2 decades. Why is it taking this long to get, to realization that agroecology is important, that transforming food systems? So maybe somebody wants to take that. And AJ, great to see you. I'd like to hand you the floor for Action Track 2. Over to you, AJ.
Thanks. I hope you can hear me. So I have to just, as a farmer, I'm speaking as a farmer, the UN Food System Summit will be having producer group dialogues also, which have not started yet. There will be 3 or more of them for different geographies of the planet. And we would urge the civil society to join up. We would urge to get other producer groups to join up. We will be advertising it in a very large way. And the Food System Summit is looking at farmer issues as producer issues and fisher issues. We're all here for you. And we look for your ideas, your support, and we request you to keep pushing us to the limits possible. Thank you.
Okay, AJ, thank you very much. Sandrine, I don't know if that's a legacy hand or if you wanted to come in on this.
No, I'll come in both on the right to food and also on the agroecology. So I wrote back actually to Hans Herren. I think that agroecology and regenerative practices were probably the game-changing solutions that were put in most of the action tracks. And clearly we see across the action tracks, so all the way from action track 3 to action track 5, the important role that agroecology and regenerative agriculture play in a sustainable food system. So it may have been ignored over the last 10 years, but it certainly isn't being ignored now. And I can promise you that the action tracks are focusing very much and have had many conversations, including with many of you. Many of those that are in the chat talking about the importance of agroecology have sent in their feedback, their evidence, and we are going through it and absolutely taking this into consideration. So I think we see it all as a game-changing solution. It will be absolutely part of the summit and the discussions also that we're already having with the member states, many of whom are bringing it up themselves. So yes, the time is now for regenerative and agroecology. It's here, we're taking it into consideration. With regard to the right to food, the same, absolutely this. Why have we forgotten the absolute universal right of food? That is also very much central to how we build resilience from both a social and an environmental perspective. And that has been taken into consideration in several of the action tracks, but is also fundamental within Action Track 5 in terms of building resilience and ensuring that we have a resilient food system. So I'm trying to answer those 2 questions at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sandrine. Great job. Christine, over to you, and then Lhasa.
Yeah, just very quickly, read our discussion starters, start looking through our solutions. And I appreciate that's just words on text, but it's there. And in addition to make sure there's words on text become reality, as you know, we have guidance from Michael Thackeray. There's 2 special rapporteurs on the right to food, Halal Ilvar in Action Track 1, Olivier de Schutter in Action Track 3. We have Action Track 3 also has David Boyd, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment. If you look through even just Action Track 4's leadership group alone, there's human rights experts, there's governance experts. And if you are a human rights expert and you can tell us a way to get this better, join the work that we're doing. We are completely open to getting this right. Over.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Good, very good points. Lasse, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mine was just coming back to the education part. I wanted to just address quickly something where I think there is an aspect we're not have been paying enough attention to, which is the connection between education and public procurement. Because what we often see is educational institutions, whether it's schools or universities or anywhere else, that there's a discrepancy between what the textbooks are saying is sustainable food and what is being sourced there, either in the specific institution or in the municipality or the state indeed. And I think that it often sends a wrong signal to people. And when we are talking about how important it is to educate people around making food choices that are sustainable, equitable, and working within the planetary boundaries, it is so important that they also eat that food. So I think it's so important for us to make the link between public procurement and also the educational level. And that actually, to be honest, also often applies to to UN institutions.
Excellent. Lasse, thank you. Does anybody else want to come in? Otherwise, I've got a couple more questions. AJ, go ahead.
I just want to add on to Lasse's education. I think what we're looking at is a demand package that's not about individual actions making an impact on their own. They would be modest otherwise. And as far as education is concerned, we're also looking, and it's on the table, is to tax unhealthy food and to subsidize healthy food. So it's going to be a package of demands and things that will get us where we want to get. So including physical policy measures that government incentivizes, disincentivizes, and taxing unhealthy food and subsidizing healthy food. And linking that to public procurement programs, linking that to food distribution programs. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. Martin Frick.
Very briefly on the youth point, just to say there is a global youth dialogue coming up in April, and education will be central to it. It will also be central to our Good Food for All campaign that we will be launching at this global dialogue on youth that we are organizing together with UNICEF. Stay tuned with our social media. We will announce that. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Let me go to a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up with some final comments. There were a couple questions from our African friends who are in attendance. Adubi Isaiah Aluwatosin asks about the 2016 UNCTAD World Investment Forum meeting and highlights that Africa needs to access sustainable finance to support food and agriculture projects. Is this summit going to make any difference for Africans in terms of finance and access to finance? Who would, is anybody? I know we don't have our finance lever representative here, but it's something that we're all focused on in the action tracks. Anybody want to take a stab?
Can you just repeat the question, Chris? I was too busy answering the question.
The question was, it references a 2016 UNCTAD meeting highlighting the need to access finance for genuine transformation in Africa in particular. Will this summit have any impact on that?
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to take a crack at that. We have about, when you look across the action tracks, Chris, and I don't know who asked the question, but it's a great question. We have about 6 or 7 funding initiatives, financing initiatives on raising new funds. Then there's some stuff around repurposing existing funds. And then there's some work around increasing the access to existing funds. So there are 3 components to the funding, to the answer. On the first one, I'm working really hard and I need help. So if any of you would like to help me, I'd be really happy. I'm working really hard to generate a fund to end hunger. I feel like we're very close. We're under 690 million people are hungry right now. The numbers are going up. Before COVID, they're going to be going up faster after COVID. But we have this report from Sarah's 2030, which says for an extra $33 billion a year, we can get hunger numbers from 690 million now to less than 200 million by 2030. But we need an extra $33 billion a year. I think that's within our grasp. And I think we need to focus on that. So if anyone would like to help with that, please do. I'm working really hard to make that a reality. Over to you.
Fantastic. Great. One more question before we end. There was a question to Christine Campo from Simin Fahandej asking, mentioning you spoke about current structures and systems that disadvantage certain groups. They wonder how you think current trade laws may contribute to food insecurity in certain regions. Christine, do you want to take a crack at that, or anybody else?
Really don't.
Okay.
Michael Thackeray, who is our human rights and trade expert, would be best placed to answer that. I work closely with the former Olivier de Schutter on some of these issues and wrote a publication specifically on advancing inequality in the food system. So I'm happy to pop that in the chat, but I know we still have 2 speakers after me, and 7 minutes left, and you're opening a large discussion on with that question. Sorry, I'm backing out. Chicken.
No worries. I spend a lot of time listening on WTO's webinars about the way trade and food is impacted. It's an incredibly complex topic. So anyway, more to follow on that. There was a question that I wanted to ask Martin Frick. It's really about process, but is there a wave 3 of game changers, or is the plan to just drill down on waves 1 and 2? And when will the dates for the actual summit in New York be announced, and are you anticipating any in-person action? So maybe, Martin, this might be, given that we're close to the end and you're going to give some final remarks in Agnes's place, perhaps you could include that as your final remarks, and then we'll invite Mamadou Goita to do the same. Over to you, Martin.
Okay, I shall be very brief. All of what we are doing is towards 2030. It's about transformation pathways. So we are listening to a second wave. At one point, we just need to bring it together. But I think it was Lawrence who said earlier that now, when we are coming with this area for collective action, we can check more ideas coming in, how they fit under them. And I said also that these areas will continue to have a life on their own. So we don't need to close the gate and say, sorry, the deadline is over. But I think we have, with the first wave and certainly with the second wave, a clear enough picture to build these coalitions that should be moving forward. And just to summarize from my side, I'm extremely heartened by this meeting. Fantastic questions, and please do check. And I'm stealing a line from one of the action track chairs, which is Salim, who said, when we are coming out with this area for action, just ask yourself 2 questions. Do I find myself? If yes, please do lean in, help us realizing that. And if you think something is missing, nothing is written in stone. We will continue to listen, and we will adjust to make it at the People Summit and Action Summit we promised. Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin, very much. Mamadou Goita, or I can't see you, but I know you're there. In a few minutes, could you give us some closing remarks and any final comments you'd like to make? Mamadou? Uh-oh.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Wasn't sure if you dropped off.
Yeah, no. I'm
okay.
here. I'm here, and then I cannot leave because I have to listen to everything here. Thanks a lot to everybody. And then for this closing, I think that this session has been a very informative session that allow to have a sense of what is going on in the action tracks. That is very, very important, but also what is going on in the process itself. So this is something that CSOs needed at that stage, and to get not only contributing, but also engaging in the process, but also bringing on board. The second point that I will highlight is that the many questions and comments in the chat box tell us that these kind of events are relevant. and should be renewed just to allow people to have space to ask questions, but also comment on this. And the third point, there are still many challenges that need to be addressed seriously in order to create conditions for deeper contribution from CSOs and other relevant stakeholders. That will lead me to the last point that I want to raise. So there are many requests from the whole leadership of the summit, and also mainly to Dr. Calabada and also David Nabarro to continue the dialogue with all the CSOs group, mainly the CSM members, so that the different concerns that have been raised can find solutions for a better summit that will be really not only consensual, but also that will allow to bring on board different contributions, because we need really to have this contribution from different stakeholders. So all these concerns can be addressed. I was happy to listen to Dr. Calabada with the dialogue that she had with the group. And then I would just in saying that I thank everybody from the summit governance, but also all the members of the action tracks, but also mainly on CSOs group that have been participating. I think that the valuable contribution that have been did in this process means that it can show us that we are interested in the process, and then people want deep change in the food system. And then I hope that we'll continue to not only understand what is going on, but also contributing in a better way. So we deeply hope that the answer to some of the requests will be given very soon, and that we'll have a process that will contribute to enrich all the contribution from other stakeholders. So I will really thank you very much. So we'll keep safe with the COVID-19 still a challenge for everybody, and then hoping that CSOs group will continue to challenge the debate and then also contribute more. So I thank you all for this contribution, and hope that we'll keep in touch for the coming events, but also for the changes, deep changes that will happen in the food system paradigm in the future. Thanks a lot.
Mamadou, great closing remarks. Thank you. So I've asked again that the organizers of this put the links and the questions and answer some of those follow-up questions put them on the website. There were over 100 questions plus lots more in the chat. So there's great interest. There are over 450 people today. I think this is a great start, and congratulations to the Secretariat, the organizers, Action Track leaders, Mamadou, everyone who is doing the hard work. I'm glad you invited me. I know CFS wants to see you succeed. I've been personally in public service for more than 33 years. There is no such thing as a perfect summit, a perfect meeting. It's a question of getting the best we can. And I think it's incumbent on all of us as individuals, as organizations, to support what is going to be a very game-changing summit. If it does nothing else, it alerts people to just how complex and how important food systems are, how sustainability has to be our mantra across all the complex pieces, and how it's only with cooperation, listening to each other, respecting each other's rights, will we actually make progress. So think, after September, when this summit ends, when your kids ask you, what did you do to contribute to a successful summit? Are you going to say, I contributed and helped make it a success? Or are you going to say, I sat on the outside and criticized? I can tell you my perspective, but I think it's for all of you to be thinking about. So thank you once again. Privileged to be here today and to assist you, and I wish you all the luck in the world to make this a really impactful, meaningful summit to strengthen people's rights and to end hunger and to end malnutrition, which is all of our collective goal. So thank you, and over to you. Is anybody, Martin, do you want to say a final word?
My final word would just say a big thank you to you, Chris, for an excellent moderation, and for CFS to hosting us. Thank you very much, and we are looking forward to continuing discussing with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Food is more than just what we eat. The ways in which we produce, process, and consume food touches every aspect of life on this planet. It is the foundation of our cultures, our economies, and our relationship with the natural world, and has the power to bring us together as families, communities, and nations.
Families and children are on the brink of famine.
But today's food systems are fragile and unequal. When they fail, there are ripple effects around the world, and the pandemic has impacted the most vulnerable among us. But we know what we need to do to get back on track. We have an opportunity to build back stronger than ever. Transforming our food systems is possible and necessary, and we can set a course to make real change for the benefit of all people. By bringing together key players from around the world and giving voice to citizens in every country. Because a strong food system means
no matter your race, no matter your class, no matter where you live,
women and men have equal opportunities to produce and access nutritious food,
which promotes human health at every step
without degrading land and water resources.
Significa una agricultura familiar.
Provide us, the community, with stability.
All year round, every month, every day of the week.
Even during a pandemic.
We are all connected, and we all have a responsibility to act. We must be bold. We must think and act differently. Transforming our food systems is the most powerful action we can take to solve our biggest problems. Because together,
we can build a just and resilient world.
A just and resilient world
where no one is left behind.
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 Join us today